All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Good evening. My name is Ann Drum, and I appreciate you joining us for our second Citizens Climate Lobby Texas Climate and Energy Teach-In. I'm a CCL volunteer in Dallas, and I'm joined tonight by Larry Howe, who is in Plano. And we are members of Citizens Climate Lobby's state policy team that is planning our second Texas State Lobby Day on March 31st and April 1st of next year. So mark your calendars. We're hosting this series of teach-ins to help you prepare for informed advocacy at the state capitol next legislative session. We have a packed hour planned with our special guest, energy expert Doug Lewin. I'm going to ask Doug questions for about 45 minutes, and then we'll turn it over for audience questions for the final few minutes. Please mute yourself until we open up for questions. And we'd also appreciate it if you would put your name and the town you live in the chat so that we know who's here. And if you did not get an email from me announcing this program, please email me to get on my list for the next program announcement. Larry will put my email address in the chat. Thank you. Doug Lewin, I am going to ask everyone, please mute yourselves. Doug Lewin is the founder and CEO of Stoic Energy Consulting, which serves clients in Texas working to accelerate the use of clean energy, reduce pollution, grow the clean energy economy, and increase equity and justice. I encourage everyone to check out Doug's website, douglewin.com, which we will link to in the chat. If you care about Texas energy policy, and I assume by your presence tonight that you do, then I encourage you to subscribe to Doug's Texas Energy and Power newsletter and listen to his Energy Capital podcast. I have learned a lot from studying Doug's material in preparation for tonight's conversation. So welcome, Doug.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Ann.
We are happy to have you here. Doug, our participants tonight were given some homework, starting with a Texas Monthly article about the legislature's deregulation of the electricity market in 1999. The idea was that competition would reduce prices while maintaining a sufficient supply to meet demand. Rural co-ops and city-owned power companies were exempted, so about 15 Texas cities still have regulated electric utilities. Without dwelling on this history, I want to start by asking if there is anything you think our volunteers should understand about why Texas took this step 25 years ago and why some parts of the state are not in the competitive energy market.
So, yeah, and first of all, I want to thank, obviously, Ann and Larry for having me tonight. Really appreciate the invitation, and want to thank each and every one of you for being here. You're obviously taking time out of your lives to study this stuff and learn about this stuff. You're showing up at the Capitol and in local venues, and your involvement just means so much. So I really appreciate the time and effort y'all take. Really appreciate Citizens Climate Lobby for helping to organize people. Yeah. So you said without dwelling too much on the history, like you've asked a history buff who loves to think about these things. I'm actually teaching a class at UT's LBJ school this semester called Policymaking the Energy Transition. And this is what we just spent yesterday afternoon on. So I'll try not to go too far into this, but let me just say this, and then if people want to talk more about it, I can talk about this at length. So I'll run through like a long history really briefly, because I do think to go back in time really helps. And I actually wrote an article maybe a year or so ago on Sam Insull. So Sam Insull is, I think, probably one of the most important American historical figures that like very few people have ever heard of. He was Thomas Edison's right hand. He started as Thomas Edison's business manager when he was 21 years old in the like early 1880s, just as the very first power plant was coming online. He left Edison to go to Chicago and start Commonwealth Edison, which is to this day, of course, still ComEd. There he developed the sort of utility business model that was for a monopoly utility. And the basic idea here was sort of like, I don't know where y'all live, if it's this way, but I've got, Spectrum and Google both digging up the streets to put fiber down, right? The idea was if you had like two, three, four, maybe even five or six companies stringing electric wires all over cities and neighborhoods, it was going to be very dangerous because people were, it was dangerous at that time. People were getting electrocuted by those wires. But even more to the point, very, very expensive. And so he convinced, I believe it was the Illinois legislature first. He was in Chicago, so 1907, to give the monopoly to his utility company, Commonwealth Edison. By 1914, like something like 80-90% of states had done the same thing. So like in the period of 7 years, we went from this crazy mishmash of, and there's pictures of Manhattan with like 10 different sets of wires going across it, to like a monopoly almost everywhere. And it wasn't until the energy crisis, really in the 1970s, the Congress then kind of opened that up a little bit with a law called PURPA. Don't ask me, I always forget what it stands for. Public Utility anyway, PURPA, 1978. And basically what PURPA did was allowed some competition on the generation side, that you could build your own generation and the utility would have to compensate you for it. And what they found was actually like private entities could build more competitively. So that's 1978. Fast forward to the 1990s. And in Texas, the conversations really start around competition. In 1995, the legislature, that was the first year Governor George W. Bush was in power. In 95, they deregulated wholesale first. Retail took a lot longer. 1999, they deregulate retail. They left like you said, they left the cities and the co-ops the same. I'll just wind that down by saying, a lot of times it's referred to as deregulation. I just referred to it that way. When you talk to people in the industry, they generally prefer the term restructuring. And the reason is because there's still a lot of regulation. And there's still the legislature has the authority to regulate whatever they want. Winter Storm Uri was a great example of that, right? In Senate Bill 3, they put in a requirement for winterization of power plants. ERCOT is enforcing that, I think, reasonably well. Texas doesn't, often do a great job at certain aspects of regulation. I argue there's a whole lot to be desired on the natural gas supply side from the Railroad Commission. TCQ, I don't think does a good enough job protecting human health on air quality and the like. But on this winterization piece on power plants, the PUC and ERCOT have done a pretty decent job. That is a regulation of a competitive industry. So I sometimes use the example of like restaurants, right? We don't centrally plan restaurants. We don't have a government body that says, going to put a Thai restaurant over here, Indian restaurant over here, Mexican restaurant over here. But we do, I think all of us want to make sure that there are inspectors going around and making sure what restaurants are there and are competitive in the market and attracting people to come into them are healthy. And that's why you look for that A in the window or whatever, right? So it's kind of like that. There's still regulation, but there's competition and there's not central planning. The government doesn't say, build a wind turbine there, build a gas plant there, build a nuke plant there. It really comes down to competitive forces. And I actually think that system has worked reasonably well. That may be controversial among some, and we can talk about it. I think it's worked reasonably well. And one of the reasons I think it's worked reasonably well is we've seen a boom of renewable energy in Texas, unlike anywhere else, frankly. I mean, we're now number one in wind, number one in solar, probably going to be number one in battery storage by next year. And that's because they're winning in a competition, in a competitive market. There's a lot more I could say, but that was already too long, so I'll stop.
Okay, well, but that's actually a really good segue to my first substantive question tonight, which is this basic term we hear a lot, that Texas is an energy-only market. So I'd like you to tell us what that means and how an energy market is different from a capacity market.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the first question was plenty substantive, but yes, this one's also substantive. So first of all, I think it's very important to start that conversation by saying this is not a sort of a hard kind of binary, right? This is not a 1 or a 0 or black or a white. Texas has an energy only market. And I will talk about the differences, but I think it's important. So basically, here's the differences. So in a capacity market, you have some kind of a formula by the grid operator or by a commission that is saying this is how much capacity we need, and then there is a market to try to procure that capacity. In a capacity market, you also have an energy market. So there's both. So there's a market for capacity, there's a market for energy. Generally, what happens in a capacity market is that energy market doesn't have as much revenue as the capacity market, and the prices are much lower because you don't need to get as much energy revenue because you're getting some on the capacity side. They also tend to be more expensive. They tend to be less efficient because that means that you are procuring capacity just for capacity's sake, even if it's not running. So in a capacity market, you could be paying all year long hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of this plant that may only turn on for a couple hours, or in some years, never. If it's offering in very high to the energy market, it may never get chosen, but you're paying for that capacity just to be there idle. An energy only market, and this I'll describe kind of the pure form, and then let's talk about how it really exists, because we do procure capacity in ERCOT. That's sort of, I'm giving away the end here, but like in a pure energy only market, you would have no capacity procurement, and basically you're relying on the market to have prices high enough that generators will maintain their equipment and build new generation because those prices are quite high. So in a real sort of like theoretically like pure energy only market, there either would be no cap on the price at all, or that cap would be set at the level, and this is a term of art in the industry, the value of lost load, VOL is what it's often referred to as. And the PUC just did a study on this. They asked people all over the state in surveys, how much is power worth to you? Very interestingly, to me anyway, the small commercial segment valued power way higher than large commercial or than residential. And when they averaged it out, they came to something like $35,000 a megawatt hour. So that would be, what would that be? $35 per kilowatt hour, right? You pay like 10, 15 cents. Maybe if you're on a plan you signed in the middle of 2022, maybe more like 16, 17, 18 cents. You're talking like, yeah, $35 per. So that's what the value of lost load is. We cap in ERCOT, it's capped at $5 a kilowatt hour, or 5,000 per megawatt hour. So it like, what, 80%, 85% less than what the value of lost load is. So there, but still 5,000 is a lot, right? $5 a kilowatt hour is a lot more than you would ever pay. So that's a pretty rich incentive for generators to locate in the state. That is, in fact, one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of generation being built in ERCOT to try to get that high price. And I'll just wind it down with this, though, come back to where I started. It's not a binary. It's not like you're either here or you're here. There's a whole lot of in between. And before Uri, we used to procure some reserves, but not a lot. We procure a lot more in Texas now. In fact, ERCOT created a whole new what's called ancillary service. These are basically forms of capacity that are there in case you need them. We're procuring probably 2, maybe 3 times as much backup reserves now than we were before Uri. That is capacity. We don't call it a capacity market, but there's in all markets, I think this is true, and certainly energy markets, there really is no like pure, economist dream, theoretical, perfection. It's messy. Changes all the time. They're going to continue to tweak it. But I like to think of that capacity piece as a dial. So in most parts of the country, like PJM or MISO, it's turned all the way to the right, right? It's like they procure a lot of capacity. In ERCOT before Uri, we were pretty far on the other side. Now we've turned that dial and we're kind of now more somewhere in the middle.
Interesting metaphor. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about a few graphs. So I think, would somebody please confirm that y'all can see this chart on the screen? Okay.
We can see it in, yeah.
All right. So this is a bid stat graph from a paper published by Joshua Rhodes. And using this chart as an example, would you please explain how ERCOT dispatches energy to the grid?
Yeah. So I think it's important to start to say what I'm going to describe and what Josh is showing here, this bid stack, depending on the year, this is how 10, 20, I think in some years, maybe as much as 25 or 30% of the market clears. The vast majority of the market, call it like minimum 70%, probably most years more like 80, is done through what's called a bilateral contract. So, Ann, you're a load serving entity, you're a retail electric provider, you got all these people from CCL want to buy power from you. I'm a renewable energy or any kind of I'm a power developer, whether it's gas or renewable. Well, this is CCL, so it's going to be renewable, right? Um, and so you and I could make a deal. And right. And I would say, I'm going to sell you my power for $40. And you look at this chart and you say, well, it looks to me like load is kind of clearing at like 30, right? So what happens here informs that bilateral, that two-party kind of a contract. But just know that most of the market actually happens through those contracts. But for the rest of it, for that 20 or 30% that is clearing in the spot market, basically anybody who is what's called a merchant plant. So say I build a solar plant and Ann tells me, sorry, Doug, I'm just not going to buy from you and I can't get anybody else to buy it. I can then offer that into the spot market. And as if I'm solar or wind or nuclear, this shows nuclear. It shows a little bit of renewable on the left side. You can barely see because it's at zero, right? At the cost. It's offering it at zero because there's no fuel cost associated with wind or solar, right? If I build a solar plant, my cost is all capital infrastructure. I'm not paying for fuel, it's the sun, right? So I'm going to offer in at zero. And the reason I do that is because what happens is ERCOT gets all these bids and they go up until they meet the demand. So somebody on the other side that has load to serve comes in and says, I'll pay this much for it, right? And wherever those lines meet, here's all the supply, here's all the demand, and they meet. And this is showing a black line at like what, $30 megawatt hour. That one at 30 gets picked. Anything that offered in for more money, in this case, the dark blue is like natural gas peakers that are very inefficient. They burn gas inefficiently, so they need to offer in at 40 or 50. They don't get chosen, they don't run, they don't get paid. Everything to the left of this kind of where that black vertical line is at like 40 gigawatts, that all made it, it's either 30 or less. So it all is chosen. It is dispatched by ERCOT to run because their bid was low enough, and they all get paid that clearing price. So that 30 or 32 or whatever that horizontal black line is, everybody below that gets paid that. So the renewables offer in at zero, but they get paid the 32 or the 50 or the 100 or the 10 or the 5,000, right? Whatever that clears at, everybody below that gets paid that amount.
So that's a great
clear as mud, or did I just confuse you terribly?
You made the point that what I want to make, which is it's a great profit opportunity for these low cost renewables.
Well, and look, if you we could do the experiment. I'll pull it up here. You don't need to pull it up on your screen, but we can show it later. If you go to ERCOT.com, they've got this dashboard, which I actually think is pretty good and pretty useful. And I check it almost every day. I actually didn't look today, but it is as I suspected. Like if you look at it, prices today, only as the sun was setting did prices get to $27. All day long, they were at $20 or lower. So, where that black line is there, bring it down even further, right? So if you're a solar developer and you're seeing day in, day out, even in September, it's supposed to be one of the hottest months of the year, prices are 20, you're probably not coming into the market merchant. You need somebody to buy that power. You need Austin Energy. You need HEB or Walmart. You need Google or Meta or Microsoft. You need somebody on the other side of that to say, I'll buy that from you and I'll buy it for 30 or 40 bucks, because 20 probably isn't going to cut it for you to make any profit. So that's where those bilaterals come in.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Talk for a minute about natural gas combined cycle, the NGCC. What is that, and why is that coming on earlier than some of the other sources?
So that combined cycle basically means that it's a more efficient way to burn natural gas. Their efficiency on a new natural gas combined cycle, they can be, I think, even over 50% efficient, might be as high as 60% in some cases, some of the brand new turbines. And so basically, because they're running more efficient, they're not wasting as much fuel as the others, those dark blue. Those are almost all going to be steam turbines or combustion turbines. Those are generally older technologies, although, and I know you want to talk about this later, the Texas Energy Fund, like most of the new stuff coming into the market, what's old is new again. Most are building simple cycles or combustion turbines, and we can talk about why that is. But they're less efficient, and so they tend to offer in at a higher price. The spread there is bigger when gas prices are higher. So in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine and gas prices went to $7 or $8 or $9, an inefficient gas plant was really, really expensive, right? And that's where like a combined cycle gas plant would really see a lot of savings relative to the less efficient. So NGCC combined cycle, basically you just think of that as that tends to be the newer, 20, 25-year-old stuff, not the 50 or 60-year-old stuff, of which, by the way, we have a lot. We have like 5,000 megawatts of 1960s gas plants in Texas, still with no retirement date, by the way. So we have a lot of really inefficient stuff. The light blue is going to be the more efficient gas plants.
Okay. I want to move on to a couple of slides that I actually pulled from your blog. This first one is a graph on the growth of solar. So would you kind of tell us what we're looking at here and why it's important?
So this is the month to month on solar. So yeah, and those numbers are a little too small for me to read, but it's like, yeah, I'll tell you where we are right now. I was actually just looking at this today because they always publish these updates like around the 6th or the 7th of each month. And I was just getting around to looking at it now, but we're right now at 26,000 megawatts of solar. That is phenomenal. If you were to go, so this one starts at June 24. But if you go back in time, and I literally was just looking at this, so I can pretty much just tell you, like 3 years ago, we were like below 10,000. So we've had like, a doubling and a half in the space of 3 years. Pretty remarkable. You go back to 2019, there was only 2,000 megawatts. So a 10x increase in 5 years. So the kind of aqua color there at the bottom, that's how much solar we have right now operational. The dark red, that is showing the projects that are further sort of, there's these gates. If you're a solar developer and you come to ERCOT, you kind of have these gates you got to go through. And there's basically 3. I don't know if that's actually right. It may be 4, it may be 2, but like it's not 2. It's at least 3. There's probably some other like 1A, 1B, 1C, but like basically 3 gates. And the first one is you're just like, you put down a little bit of money, you're just thinking about it. It's like a screening study. Then you get into actually like doing a much fuller engineering study and making sure that all your technical specs are right, and ERCOT's going to approve that. And then you get to the point where you're actually signing an interconnection agreement and actually putting down some real money, some financial assurance. And that's what that dark red is. So not all of that will get built. When I was just talking about that $20 a megawatt hour that we're seeing day after day, some of those folks are going to head for the hills and they're just going to go, this market is just not rich enough. Some of them already have their counterparties, others don't, and they may have a hard time getting them. So to be clear, not all of this is going to get built, but a good portion of it will. Historically, a large majority of projects in that sort of dark red zone do get built. Typically 70, 80%. On solar, the numbers are a little bit lower, and it's still such early days. It's hard to tell, but fairly safe to say, fairly conservative to say probably half of that will get built. Last thing I'll say on that, Ann, that is all contingent upon the legislature not doing something really stupid and slowing down the solar boom, which has lowered costs for consumers, is allowing economic growth, has taken the so much of the strain off of the grid in the summer. The fact that we needed 86,000 megawatts this summer, and while we were needing 86,000, the prices were like basically what I was talking about today, not $20, but maybe $40 or $50 on a day when it was 109 degrees in Austin. This solar boom has been so good for the state in so many ways. But of course, there are people, unfortunately, at the legislature that would really like to stop solar. So when I say I think it's 50% of this will get built, that is very contingent upon what policymakers do or don't do.
Okay. And then from the same blog post, I pulled this chart about storage. And so, it's showing an equal amount of storage likely to get built, the storage in the red, and that's a pretty dramatic increase. What are your comments about, can we expect most of that storage to get built?
Well, let's this is interesting. I haven't looked at this one in a little while, but and yes, Larry's right. The upper, like that weird dark blue, it's sort of a glitch in the way that they post this, and I don't know. You can just ignore that. Ignore the dark blue at the top. What you're really focusing on is kind of the aqua, which is what we actually have, and the red, which is kind of that next gate of where those are the projects that are at the last gate, right, if you will, before they actually enter the market and become operational. I just pulled this number. We are almost to 9,000 now. We're at 8,900. So this was probably the May 31 numbers. To August 31, we have added over 1,200 megawatts of storage. It's just remarkable how quick this is really taking off. So those dark red numbers, at 1,500, almost all of that has actually come online in that last 3 months. So we're now sitting at 8,900. Just to put that in perspective, at the time of Winter Storm Uri, we had 200. Now we're at 9,000, a little over 3 years later. So just a phenomenal growth. Yeah. I do expect that to continue. I think we will see a near doubling from this level by next summer. I think we'll be at 14, 15 by next summer.
That's astonishing growth.
Yep.
I just wanted to show, this is a screenshot I took of the ERCOT dashboard Thursday afternoon when wind and solar were providing almost 41% of the grid's energy. So, when we look at this dramatic growth in renewables and storage, what are the implications of this for natural gas?
Well, gas is still kind of king on the ERCOT grid. I mean, it still is providing, you look at those capacity numbers in that right column, right? There's still more gas than anything else by far. Gas still provides the most, that's capacity. Those are capacity numbers. That's how much you could get if you were using all of it instantaneously. But even as a generation number, if you were to put the H, the megawatt hours, how much generation actually comes from natural gas, it is also number one in that category too. What does it mean for natural gas? I mean, if you own a really old gas plant in the state, but between solar and storage coming on, and then the Texas Energy Fund bringing new gas peakers on, I think we're going to see some retirements, probably among the older coal and the older natural gas. CPS Energy is trying to close 800 megawatts of that gas was 3 units, 66, 68 in 1970. So 2 LBJ era, 1 Nixon, all pre-Clean Air Act gas plants. They're trying to close them. So yeah, I think we will see some retirements. But I think for the gas that was, built right after the deregulation or restructuring bill passed in 95, on the wholesale side, the 95 was the 1995 bill. There was this wave of gas plants built, and those are, 25 or so years old. I don't think those are going anywhere. I think they will start to run at lower capacity factors. That just means they're running less hours. So there's 8,760 hours in a year, which there are. It used to be those gas plants would run 7,000 or 8,000 of them. I think we're moving rapidly, if we're not there already, into an era where they're running 3,000 or 4,000 hours per year. And a few years beyond that, they might be running 1,000 or 2,000 hours per year. That's not necessarily bad for those plants if they're fully depreciated and paid off by their owner. And with the high prices, the way the energy only market works with the kind of volatile prices and short periods of high prices, they can get those and they can end up doing quite well. But yeah, on the grid over time, I think we're going to see that solar bar get bigger. Wind is not growing nearly as fast. We'll see that storage part get a lot bigger as well. And I think we'll see gas and coal decline over time. But to be clear, it's still the number one source on the Texas grid.
Okay,
Hey, and just a FYI, we're at 7:30.
got it. Thank you. So these are two graphs from yesterday. The one on the left shows storage activity, and the one on the right showing the fuel mix. So just, would you talk a little bit about what these are telling us about how storage is doing its work?
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is sort of a good illustration of what is called net peak, and it's kind of an important term if you're going to be in Austin for your lobby days and talking about the grid and all that stuff. You will hear folks say, "Well, solar's great, but what about when the sun goes down?" Right? And that if you look kind of at the top line, right, whatever that top line, that's sort of showing you what the demand on the grid was, right? And so you can see at like 4 o'clock, which of course is the 16 there, and a little after like 5 o'clock, that's where the system peaks, right around 4, 5, 6 o'clock. So that's gross peak. But what they call net peak is the amount of demand minus the wind and solar that's available. So when you get to 7 or 8 o'clock, sun's going down, time we're talking right now, right? The sun's going down. Wind usually, and you can see this on there, wind is, there's pretty small amount in the middle of the day. It's actually beautifully complementary to solar because you can see there's less wind in the middle of the day when there's a lot of sun. And then as the sun's going down, wind comes on. But you notice right there around 7 or 8, like that wind bar hasn't gotten really big yet. I don't know what was going on yesterday, but typically the coastal wind is sort of humming. It takes the West Texas wind and the Panhandle wind a little longer till like 10 or 11 till it really kicks up. So storage, that little red bump there, it's little for now, but you're going to see that really get bigger and bigger with each passing month and year. As a matter of fact, this is 2,000 megawatts yesterday. The record is about 4,000 on August 20th when we hit our all-time peak demand and our all-time net load number as well. We were like at 71,000 megawatts of demand after you subtract out wind and solar, and batteries provided 4 of that. So that's about 5%. And we're seeing that pretty consistently. Storage can get to 5 even in some days. Well, we're not at 6% yet, but we'll see that pretty soon. So that's what it's showing is as the sun goes down, you still have fairly high demand, not as high as at 5, but still pretty high. And that's really where storage kind of surges and helps keep prices lower and keep the lights and the air conditioning on.
Okay, so I want to pivot now from large scale generation of energy transmitted through the grid to distributed energy resources like solar panels on homes and businesses, EV batteries, big home batteries, demand response programs, and programmable appliances. So how do you explain to a layperson what virtual power plants and microgrids are? Uh-oh, wait.
Sorry, I muted myself. Sorry, I was
Okay.
taking a sip of water, so I muted myself. Sorry. Virtual power plants are basically, the easiest way to think of it is as you get more and more solar and storage, and like you said, EVs. So there's really like, there's two sides of this, right? There's supply and demand. So we can talk for a minute just about supply. We'll come back to demand. But there's, supply on the bulk grid is going to be your big gas and coal plants, nuclear plants, these big solar fields out in West Texas. Obviously, your wind turbines down in South Texas, West Texas. On the demand side, and what we mean by that, right? You're driving along and you see the great big transmission lines, right? When you get closer to the city, you'll see they're near you. Look for them next time you're driving by them, right? These substations and what's going on at the substations, even the transformers that might be around your house, is they're taking that high voltage power and they're stepping it down so it can come into your wall to power your computer or whatever at 110 volts, right? It's running through those lines at 365. There's talk now in Texas finally of building some 765. It's got to step all the way down to 110. So on the distribution grid, they bring it down. Now on that distribution side of the grid, you can also have power sources, right? Solar on your roof, a power wall in your garage, right? And then more and more electric vehicles. And let me just drop this statistic on you. This was Jigger Shaw talks about this a lot from the Department of Energy. And I put it in one of my articles like a year ago, but I need to update it. We have 300,000 electric vehicles on the road. If you just do the simple math of an average battery is about 60 or 70. I just got the Mustang Mach-E, which I love, by the way, and it's extended range. It's got 91. But if you just take as an average number like 60 kWh and you times that by the 300,000, there's 20 gigawatts of batteries, right? I was just getting so excited, right, about how we have 9,000 megawatts. There's on the grid, on the bulk grid, there's 20,000 megawatts worth of batteries driving around in cars. And that's only 300,000 out of the 20 million cars in Texas, right? And that's not even counting all the buses and trucks. We are rapidly, by the end of the decade, we will probably have hundreds of gigawatts, more than the entire power need of the state of Texas, rolling around in batteries and vehicles, right? So now you got all this power in the cars. If you could figure out, and it's a technical challenge, but not impossible, how to get some of that power to the grid, right? And you start adding up all these small sources, all these little, and they're not so little, but these batteries and solar panels all around the grid, and you add it up, you could be talking really, really big numbers, like the size of power plants. That's why we call them virtual power plants. They're kind of all these little sources put together. Here's the last thing I'll say about this, Ann. Number one, there is so much potential in this area. And if you look at, I like to talk about the problems we have on the grid as being four things. Depending on who I'm talking to, a lot of people don't want to talk about the fourth one, which is sustainability. With folks on this call, you guys want to talk about that. But even for our friends out there who insist that climate change isn't happening or whatever, if you care about the other three, reliability, resiliency, and affordability, VPPs, virtual power plants, are great for all of those. For reliability, they add supply to the grid, right? This was a problem during Winter Storm Uri. We didn't have enough supply to meet the demand. Resiliency, when a hurricane comes through, we saw in Houston, we have a very recent memory now of how terrible that can be, how devastating the loss of life can be. Having those virtual power plants, if you can island them, and there's a technical standard that enables that. If you're shopping for solar and storage, I encourage you to tell the electrician, I want to be able to go into island mode so the solar panels and the battery can power my home when the grid is down. That adds resiliency. Within a few years, frankly now, like within a year, there is no good reason why every hospital, every nursing home, every fire department, every dialysis center, every school, which can act as a resilience hub for people in trouble, shouldn't have solar storage and, by the way, gas backup. And we can talk about why that is. I think they need gas backup too, because if we're talking about nursing homes and hospitals, it's too important. We need redundancy. There is no reason why we shouldn't have those power sources where it is needed. And then the last thing I'll say on this, so exciting. Texas is leading the way in wind. So exciting. We're leading the way in solar. So exciting. We're leading the way in batteries. On the utility scale, we are way behind on the stuff we're just talking about there. We are terrible in Texas at rooftop solar, terrible at integrating batteries and electric vehicles into the grid. This is a place we are a laggard. There are good things happening. The PUC has started a pilot program. Pilots are good. Scale is better. And we need to get to scale of this stuff for the reasons we just talked about: reliability, resiliency, affordability, sustainability. There are very few solutions on the grid that check all four of those boxes, and distributed energy resources or virtual power plants is one of those.
So does getting to scale involve the PUC doing the rulemaking that SB 1699 calls for?
That's part of it. I mean, I do want to be fair to the PUC. I do think that they have, the pilot is a big deal, and I sort of just minimized it there, and I don't mean to minimize it. This is hard stuff. When the pilot first was talked about by then Commissioner McAdams, he's left the commission since then. ERCOT, he wanted to have it as like I think the original thing that they were talking about, some market participants have proposed like 10 megawatts, and ERCOT was saying like, we can't do more than one. And they ended up ERCOT, to their credit, agreed on a cap of 80 megawatts. Right now, a year and a half of the pilot, they're only at 15 megawatts. So we were talking about tens of thousands of megawatts, right? 20,000 megawatts worth of batteries and electric vehicles. We're at 15, not 15,000, just 15, like 5, 10, 15. That's it within the pilot right now. So what it takes is the PUC really putting some more attention on that pilot, ERCOT opening up the market to competition from these smaller sources. A lot of the big generators aren't real happy about that. You can understand why. It's a threat to their business model, but that's really what it takes, is really the PUC putting a focus on it, opening up the market to competition from these smaller sources, and frankly, starting to put some incentives behind it, recognizing the value that they bring for resilience and reliability.
So if Texas is way behind on virtual power plants, who's doing it well?
I would say, Australia is an interesting place to look. Australia is very much like Texas in that it is an island, right? We aren't literally an island like Australia, but our electric grid is. So a lot of parallels there. We have about 3,000 megawatts of distributed solar, about 5,000 megawatts of distributed resources. They've got 20,000. Their peak load is less than ours, but they've got 5, 6, 7 times as much as we do. California does pretty well with this. But beyond that, Texas is going to be a leader in this. I do think we're going to figure this out. I think Texans are going to demand it. Unfortunately, there's going to be another hurricane. The whole barrel situation is going to be repeated. I just think, and the technology is going to continue to improve. Markets are speaking. People are buying the solar panels, buying the electric vehicles, buying the power walls. I think we are going to be a leader in this, but it will take some focus from the PUC and potentially from the legislature as well.
Okay, I've got one more question I'm going to ask, and then we're going to open it up to questions from our participants. Last session, the legislature passed SB 2627, which created the Texas Energy Fund with $5 billion in loans and grants to incentivize new natural gas generation. Leaders plan to increase that fund to $10 billion next session. Is there a risk that these natural gas generation facilities will become stranded assets before the 20-year loans mature?
I mean, the short answer is yes, there's certainly a risk. How high that risk is, it's, I think there is some risk. It's really hard to say how high that risk is. So much of it and depends on how much new load comes to Texas, right? There's all this discussion around AI data centers and AI data centers that, you can plop one down in 6 to 12 months and it can be 1,000 megawatts of demand or more. So, if we get really high load growth, I think it's a little less risky. If that load growth does not materialize, all these projections of, there's ERCOT has a projection out, and this is on their main webpage. You can see it there now. It was kind of hidden before, but it's kind of easier to find now. They have a projection that we're, again, 86,000 megawatt peak right now, that we will be at about 150,000 by 2030. So 2030 is it's like 5 years away, right? I mean, it's like, so that's a phenomenal growth rate. If we even had half of that, these gas plants may not be incredibly risky. If that load growth does not materialize, they're quite a bit more risky. Just one more thing real quick about 2627. It was $10 billion total. That's what the bill said. You cannot spend money in a bill, right? There's one bill you can spend money in. It's the budget. That's it, right? The budget actually had $5 billion for this. So that's what's been appropriated so far. They're going to try for the other $5 billion. In the bill, the $10 billion is broken down by $7.2 billion for gas plants and ERCOT, $1 billion for outside of ERCOT, because don't forget, right, this is a Texas thing. It was a constitutional amendment. So there's parts of Texas outside ERCOT. So they allocated some money in the bill for that. And then there's 1.8 billion for what we were talking about earlier, these kind of virtual power plants, really microgrids at critical facilities. It's a pretty good incentive. It's $500,000 per megawatt up to a 2.5 megawatt system for critical facilities. So all the things I was talking about, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, water treatment centers, hospitals, fire departments, police departments, so resiliency hubs that local governments maintain for their citizens, stuff like that. They received the 5 billion, and then they announced that they had loans of 5.4 billion for the gas plants. And they did this just a month or two after Hurricane Beryl hit Houston. And what I think was just a clear like snub to Texans of like, sorry, we're getting these big gas plants, and y'all in Houston who just suffered, and those fire departments that there were 10 fire departments that lost fire stations rather that lost power during Beryl. I don't understand. The priorities are all misplaced. The microgrids should have at least gone alongside the natural gas plants, if not gone first. Just last thing I'll say about this. Last week, maybe the week before, I was going through some filings and saw that NextEra, a really large power company, put a filing in and said, hey, PUC, you guys announced 17 gas plants that you were going to fund. And one of them had our name on it with a partner, and that partner didn't have our consent, and they put our name in without our knowledge. And then it came out. I had some tipsters, but I was the first one to put out on Twitter that the company that won, their CEO had been convicted of embezzlement related to a gas plant, not a gas plant project. It was actually a pet coke project, but whatever, a fossil plant in Texas 7 years ago. And somehow the PUC and Deloitte, who they paid $12 million to vet these proposals, didn't catch that the CEO had been convicted of embezzlement for a power plant in Texas. So that probably takes, I don't know how big that project was, but if you just do the math of how big that project was the second largest out of the 17, that's probably a $700 or $800 million project. I am making the argument to anybody that will listen, and since you guys are listening, I'll make the argument to you that they should not spend that $700 or $800 million on another gas plant. It should go towards the microgrids, because it's not a question of if another hurricane is going to hit the Texas coast. It's a question of when, and we ought to make sure every hospital, fire department, water treatment facility, nursing home, et cetera, has power on site so that people are protected and safe in extreme weather. All right, I'm off my soapbox, but I'll get right back on it after you ask another question.
From your lips to the legislature's ears. Okay, we're going to go to questions. So use the raise hand thingy on Zoom. Who wants to raise their hand and ask the first question of Doug? And please, we just have a few minutes left, so please make your questions efficient.
Yeah, there was one in the chat earlier.
Okay, go ahead and read it.
Yeah, just a mention about the geothermal. I think there's a lot of potential for advanced or enhanced geothermal. Any thoughts on that real quick, Doug?
I'm extremely bullish on geothermal, and to the question about like how much risk there is around these natural gas plants, that's another variable, right? Like how quickly do what are called clean firm sources come along? If you're interested in geothermal, I recorded a podcast with Cindy Taff. She's the CEO of Sage Geosystems. She was in the oil and gas industry for 35 years. She's now doing geothermal. It uses the same skill set. We have a lot of oil and gas workers in the state. Many of them will be able to work for geothermal companies. She said basically everybody she's hired at her company was once with an oil and gas company. I did one last year with Tim Latimer. That was when I had the Texas Power podcast. Now my podcast called Energy Capital Podcast. He's with a company called Fervo. Fervo they just announced the results of a test they had done. Just short story here, wildly successful. Like that technology is advancing very quickly, and I'm really excited about geothermal. Maybe we'll talk in 5 years and you'll be like, boy, were you wrong, nothing happened. Who knows? It's still very early days, but I'm pretty excited about it, very bullish on geothermal.
Well, it's good to hear. Thomas Ortman, you had your hand up. Ask your question.
Thanks, Ann. Thank you, Doug, for a great discussion. Kind of a two-part question, really. The enhanced geothermal systems from SAGE and Fervo, they are dispatchable. And within the legislation that I recall reading at last year's CCL Texas, legislative event, the legislation demanded that the energy source was dispatchable but could not include batteries. So does EGS, in fact, actually check that box and open up an opportunity that might not have been recognized?
Yeah, it probably would, and maybe they'll try to get in on a future round. Yeah, my reading of the bill, I'd have to go back and look at it again, but my going on memory, what you're saying is correct. And to be clear, what I do remember is the bill definitely, you're right, banned electrical energy storage. It did not ban like mechanical. And actually, one of the things that SAGE is doing is actually using they're basically using geothermal as a kind of storage,
Right.
and it would be more mechanical than electrical. So yeah, I do think they would qualify.
And when you say mechanical, I'm thinking thermal.
Storage, well, thermal should also qualify, but mechanical, I'm just thinking of things like in the Northwest, it would be like pumped hydro. We don't have geological formations for pumped hydro, but you can do it in caverns. And there actually is a company out of Houston they've been trying to do a demonstration. I don't think they've done demonstration yet, but they could like move water around a cavern, right? So like that, there's different kinds of mechanical.
Okay. Yeah.
Some people do these things where you like lift up a big brick and then it drops down. That would be mechanical storage.
Okay. The original question I had before the geothermal issue came up was, being that all of us are lobbyists, citizen lobbyists, I have received some guidance from official, formal, real lobbyists about how to approach these issues within the legislature. And some of the guidance, for example, was don't mention climate change. Don't even use those words or they'll throw you out on your ear.
It depends who you're talking to, right?
Understand.
Context is everything.
Anyone with an R after their name.
Not all of them. Not all of them. Some of them have some sense. I mean, there are some over there. They're worried about a Republican primary and they may not say anything publicly. But if you're talking to them privately, there's a good number of them. Certainly not all of them, and probably not a majority, but there's a good number of them that know damn well climate change is happening and humans cause it.
Right. Do you have any any rules of thumb guidance when we are speaking with our legislators?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, like I wouldn't lead. I know climate's in your name, so it's kind of tough, but like I wouldn't lead with climate. I would lead with things like, resiliency, reliability, affordability, all those kinds of things. Self-reliance, if you're talking about microgrids, again, like context is everything, right? The more you can talk to professional lobbyists, talk to people that are like really watching the legislature all the time, do your homework, try to find out, where'd they go to high school, where'd they go to college, like try to connect with members and their staff, right? As human beings. And by the way, treat staff well. I used to be a staffer at the legislature. I can tell you from being over there that like the staff, they are not, it's not a professional legislature. The legislators are paid $600 a month. They usually almost all have other jobs unless they're retired, which a number of them are retired, but not a majority. Like most of them are working other jobs. A lot of people make the mistake of like, I'm not talking to anybody unless I can talk to the member. Talk to the staff, try to get to the right staff, ask them if they work on these issues. If they don't, ask respectfully, like which staff member does work on these issues. Then the next time, don't be rude to the one who's talking to you, but then file that away. So next time you come in, you're trying to schedule an appointment with that staffer. What else? I mean, yeah, listen, obviously you want to talk, you got things to tell them and you got important information, but listen to them as well. Listen to their point of view. It's just basic human stuff, right? I mean, like try to connect with them, meet them where they're at, all that good stuff.
Great.
Thanks.
Stuart, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. And you just described the CCL mantra. So I have two questions related to the microgrid issue. Is there anything that prevents a local utility like CPS Energy here in San Antonio or Austin Energy from starting its own program within its domain? Is there anything in the legislature that, any legislation rather, that prevents that?
Not only is there nothing that prevents it, I'm constantly perplexed as to why they're not doing more. So I was talking about the ADR pilot. There is a task force that is now they've met before, but now they're going to really start meeting monthly. CPS is actually on there. Austin Energy's not. I don't know why. There was one co-op on there, Bandera Electric Co-op, and it turns out to earn they're able to earn ancillary service revenues. These backup reserves can be pretty lucrative. The first one to earn those was Tesla through their aggregation. The second one in the state of Texas was tiny little Bandera Electric Co-op out west of San Antonio, out in the hill country. Now they are expanding the task force from 20 members to 31, and of the 11 new members, 4 of them are co-ops. There's 2 ways that co-ops and municipals mostly spend money. One is on generation, and one is on transmission. Of course, there's their own distribution system. There's other ways they spend money too, and personnel. But like those are like the 2 big ones: generation, transmission. With generation, those DERs or virtual power plants are generation, and on transmission, the way they are charged for transmission, they're charged by how much they're using at the highest intervals during the summer. Just like large industrial consumers are charged their transmission charges that way, the municipals and co-ops appear to ERCOT as one large meter. And so if they can have these little microgrids all around, that's reducing the need at 5 o'clock. They're saving on generation and they're saving on transmission. So they should be doing more of it. I don't understand why they're not. I've had these conversations with folks there, and I've yet to hear a great reason why they wouldn't be going much heavier and leaning much heavier into this.
Yeah. Well, the related follow-up is, are you aware of, or is there any particular legislator that would be interested in introducing legislation along these lines?
Well, specifically for co-ops and munis to do more?
Well, just for getting these microgrids and distributed power plants legal and moving forward.
I would talk to everybody on business and commerce and everybody on state affairs. That whole, that's like 25 legislators. Those are the ones. There's some that are really good on this, but I think it's kind of I don't think it's like a very partisan issue. It's like there's a whole lot of Republicans in the state that really want to have solar and storage because they don't want to be, or gas generation. Gas generators are part of the distributed thing too. So there's a lot of interest across the ideological spectrum. And the only thing, just on co-ops and munis, it's very important if you live in a co-op area or a muni to talk to your co-op board, to consider running for your co-op board, to talk to your city council members. Generally, the legislature and the PUC don't pass a lot of stuff requiring them to do stuff. The governance is close to you, like that's the place to make it happen.
Okay, thank you.
Larry, real quick, last question.
Yeah, just Doug, I know that you're working with the Texas Climate and Energy Caucus, so I do want to make sure everybody from CCL knows to follow that caucus. We talked about it last year or last session. We want to do that again, and those are some key legislators to engage with. But also, I think it's really fascinating. Powerhouse Texas, which is a complement organization to the caucus, and I know, Doug, you're involved with that, has been really doing some great things to help educate staff and stuff. I don't know if you had any comments on that and anything we can do to help cheer them on.
Thanks for that. I'm chairman of the board of Powerhouse, and I'm very proud of what they've done. Long story short, they're doing 3 things. They've got legislative fellows that are going to be in 8 offices this session. They hold energy forums around the Capitol, which are open to the public. They're mostly trying to get legislative staffers there. They're doing an energy academy where they bring in academics and industry experts on a wide variety of different topics, wide variety of different viewpoints too, by the way. The idea is basically to level up the education, because I think when staffers are educated better on this stuff, we get better policy outcomes. And then they've also had they've convened what they call the Energy Policy Advisory Council. So they're getting academics from around the state that study energy systems all the time together, pairing them together with offices. And the idea there basically was like, these offices are often hearing from the same people over and over, particularly the same like industry lobbyists over and over. They need a broader, to just kind of widen the aperture, but they're busy and they're not going to go seek out some academic at Abilene Christian or UT Arlington or UT RGV or wherever. So they're kind of powerhouses bringing those folks to the legislators. The staff there, Patricia and Lindsay and Annika, they're fantastic and just doing a great job.
Well, we are out of time. Doug Lewin, I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you want to learn more about these very important topics, please follow Doug's blog and podcast at douglewin.com. We will circulate an email with the link to this recording when it is up, along with the recording of our June conversation with Jeremy Mazer of Texas 2036. And we'll notify you when we have our next program ready. So in case you didn't get an email from me about this program, please email me to make sure you get on my list. I put my email address andrum.ccl@gmail.com in the chat. So that's it for tonight. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Doug, for joining us. Everyone be well, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.